Hey guys, tonight we drift into the dimly lit world of 18th century sleep, where bedtime was a ritual, not a rushed affair, and night itself stretched longer than you'd ever imagine. Picture this. The sun sinks beyond the trees, and already, candles flicker to life across quiet villages. Oil lamps are trimmed, fires coaxed into gentle embers, and in a world before electricity, darkness arrives early, and stays. You're about to slip into the kind of sleep you've never experienced, unless you've gone camping with no phone, no clock, and a serious fear of owls. You probably won't survive this, because let's be real, you're used to 11 p.m. doom scrolling, not curling up at 8:45 with a belly full of boiled turnips and no caffeine in sight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle into bed, the straw crackling slightly beneath you. There's a faint scent of beeswax from the candle stub burning beside your shared chamber pot. Romantic, I know. Sleep comes quickly in this era, and not just because there's nothing else to do. The body, without the glow of screens or the hum of engines, reacts to the real rhythm of dusk. And in the 18th century Europe, especially in rural areas, people often slipped under their covers as soon as the sun had tucked itself away. That might mean bedtime at 7:30 in December, and yes, that's as wild as it sounds. You don't fight it. You've eaten your supper, a modest plate of stewed root vegetables and maybe a slice of dark bread. Your limbs are heavy from manual labour, your belly is fullish, and your brain is blessedly undistracted. Sleep simply feels inevitable. Natural. And honestly, it kind of makes sense. One candle costs you more than a week's worth of eggs, so why burn it staying awake? Of course, not everyone had the luxury of early sleep. Servants were still sweeping hearths or laying out linens for their wealthier employers. Soldiers on night watch were sharpening blades or listening for thieves. And midwives. Oh, they were often just beginning their shift. Birth has no curfew. But you're lucky tonight. You've managed to get horizontal before the fire dies. You tug a coarse wool blanket over your shoulders and drift into what we might call a first sleep. Historians actually use that phrase, first sleep, because in this era, nighttime wasn't one long stretch of slumber, it was split. The first sleep usually lasted about 4 hours, followed by a period of wakefulness called the watch, or the interval. Then came a second sleep, another 4 hours or so before dawn gently clawed back the dark. That first descent into sleep, though, it was often deep, dreamless, restorative. Your body sank fast. No alarms, no buzzing notifications, no LED toothbrushes announcing bedtime routines. Just the creak of a settling house and maybe, just maybe, the soft snore of someone 2 feet away from you. And yes, people shared beds. A lot. Sometimes even with strangers. But we'll get to that later. For now, your eyes close, the wax drips, and slowly, the sounds of the outside world fade away. A dog barks far off. A windmill groans. Somewhere, a baby begins to fuss, but you've already slipped under. Oddly enough, people in this period often felt proud of their first sleep. It was seen as purer, deeper, untainted by dreams or restlessness. Farmers would say it built muscle. Priests might call it the sleep of innocence. It was something to be protected, even guarded. Doors were bolted, shutters drawn. Some folks even scratched little crosses into wooden bedposts for protection. Evil spirits, they believed, were fond of sneaking into rooms between dusk and midnight. You never knew when some passing spectre might want to borrow your soul for a bit. And honestly, you're starting to understand the superstition. This early sleep is thick, velvet-like. You're dreaming, maybe, though you won't remember it. Your body's doing its thing. Heart rate down, temperature falling. Everything slows. Then, somewhere around midnight, you stir. You're not alone. Because waking up after first sleep wasn't considered strange. It was expected. In fact, if you didn't wake up in the middle of the night, your neighbour might suggest you had weak humours or too much melancholia in your liver. Yeah, medicine was weird, but in this moment, you're just blinking up at the low-beamed ceiling. The candle's gone, the fire's out, but your mind, gently humming. You're not tired, not really. But you're not exactly awake either. It's an odd middle zone, part lucid, part dreamy, and totally normal in this age. Some people used the time to pray, others to talk. Some folks even got up to tend animals or eat a midnight snack. More on that soon. But for now, you stay in bed, watching the shadows stretch across the room. You hear your brother turning in his corner. Someone down the lane coughs. The silence is full, not empty. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep was a natural human rhythm or something caused by lack of artificial light. Some say it's what our bodies want to do, deep down, if only the modern world would let us. Others think it was just a product of the times, longer nights, colder winters, and too many sermons about idle hands. But you're just here in this weird, wonderful hour. Not quite dreaming, not quite awake, suspended, safe, and maybe, just maybe, more rested than you've felt in years. You're still awake, aren't you? Not fully, but just enough. This is the strange stretch between two sleeps, and you're right on time. Welcome to the 18th century version of a midnight hangout, except no one's checking TikTok or debating whether to DoorDash another dessert. This waking period, it's expected, even celebrated. So go ahead, open your eyes a little wider. You're not broken, you're in rhythm. Most people would wake naturally after about 4 hours. The term for this was often the watch, or more quaintly, the watching hour. Not because you were watching anything particularly interesting, but because, well, you weren't asleep. And if your neighbours were up too, you might even hear the low murmur of voices behind thin walls, or see a candle flickering across the field like a firefly. You lie still at first, adjusting to the dark, the silence, and the creaking groan of the house settling into its beams. For a few moments, it feels sacred. It's as if the world has shrunk to just your breath and the occasional rustle of someone turning over. Maybe you're even sharing a bed, and they're up too. Maybe the two of you exchange a few quiet words. It was common to pray during this time or reflect on dreams. It was also prime time for intimacy. Doctors and clergy alike once encouraged couples to try for children during the watching hour. It was said to be the best moment, biologically and spiritually. Nothing says romance like whispering sweet nothings beside a cracked chamber pot. But it wasn't just romantic. Some folks got up and actually did things. Tasks that didn't need light or could be done by the fire's last embers. You might put another log on. You might check the goat pen. You might even read, if you were lucky enough to own a book and literate enough to enjoy it. In wealthier homes, where candles were plentiful and blankets even more so, the watch was seen as a contemplative gift, an hour of silence, free from the noisy world and its demands. In fact, one of the most curious finds from the period is in journals and letters. People actually wrote about this time. Between my first and second sleep, one man wrote, I composed a poem for my brother's birthday. Others logged their dreams, recorded strange bodily sensations, or even counted stars from their frosty window ledges. The idea of being awake at 2 a.m. wasn't strange. It was a known rhythm, a middle chapter, not a glitch. One fringe behaviour, and this one's a little weird. You might visit a neighbour. Yep. People sometimes left their homes during this liminal time. They'd knock softly on a friend's door or sneak out to deliver a message or even walk across town. There were even records of secret rendezvous. No phones, no texts, just the sound of feet crunching over cold mud and the flick of a lantern leading the way. The churches were quiet during this time, but not always. Monasteries still marked the night with bells, and sometimes these bells would echo into the villages, stirring people who were already half awake. You could find a few devout souls kneeling at makeshift home altars, murmuring through half-memorized prayers in the dark. But you for now might just sit up, stretch, and adjust your nightcap. Yes, by the way, you're wearing a nightcap. It's not just a cartoon thing. The head lost heat fastest in the cold stone cottages of rural England or France, and keeping it warm was essential. The classic look, a long pointed cap tied beneath the chin, wasn't about style, it was survival. But back to this moment. Maybe you can't fall back asleep right away. You're not supposed to. It's fine. This period might last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. It's like bonus time. Maybe your spouse has already dozed off again and you're lying there, tracing the wooden beams with your eyes. Maybe you hum a tune. Maybe you think about tomorrow's bread baking or the repair that still needs doing on the barn roof. You're not racing towards sleep. You're wandering toward it. Historians still argue whether this waking interval was encouraged, tolerated, or simply inevitable. Some suggest it was caused by diet, activity levels, or even the absence of light pollution. Others claim it was reinforced by culture, religion, and economy. What's clear, though, is that it was everywhere. From peasants in Prussia to merchants in Madrid. People slept in two distinct phases, and for them, it worked. And here's the kicker. Some modern sleep studies in the 1990s replicated these conditions. No artificial light, extended periods of darkness. The result? Participants naturally began to divide their night into two sleeps, with a quiet waking period in the middle. Like their bodies remembered something their brains had forgotten. Wild, right? But eventually the second wave of sleep comes calling, and when it hits, it's dreamy, literally. People often reported that the second sleep was richer in dreams, more vivid, more emotional, sometimes even more prophetic. There were whole books written to decode these dreamscapes. We'll get into that later, but for now, you feel your eyelids grow heavy. You've stoked the fire, muttered a prayer, maybe even pulled your nightcap down a little tighter. And so begins the second sleep. You turn over, tuck the covers closer, and slide, gratefully, peacefully, back into rest. It's not a perfect sleep. No memory foam, no blackout curtains. Just the sound of wind through the shutter cracks and the slow rhythm of breath around you. But it's enough. More than enough. In the stillness, your mind floats. A cartwheel of half-formed images, a horse without a saddle, a meal you never ate, a candle that lights itself. Are you dreaming? Who knows? But you're deep now, lost to the world again. Until morning light creeps in, you're awake again, but this time it's on purpose. The second sleep has ended. Naturally, without an alarm, without a blaring notification, and without that awful moment where you slap at your phone like it insulted your ancestors. The light outside your shutter is turning grey. Morning is whispering. But let's backtrack to the middle of the night. Because that strange waking hour, it wasn't always a peaceful lie-in. In fact, people used that time. The world didn't sleep solidly in the 1700s. Not really. Instead, you, like many others, probably had a task or two to handle in the middle of the night. Not in a frantic, insomnia-fueled panic like we might today, but in a calm, practical, I might as well do this while I'm up kind of way. What did people do at 2 a.m? Well, kind of everything. First, there was prayer. It was common, almost expected, for devout Christians to use this interval for spiritual reflection. You might kneel beside the bed, whispering Hail Marys or reciting the Lord's Prayer by heart. Monks and nuns did this ritualistically, marking matins and lauds, the earliest divine offices of the liturgical day. If you were layfolk, you might have done your own abbreviated version, a kind of midnight check-in with the Almighty. Then there was chatting. Yup. Bed sharing was rampant, and that meant nighttime conversations were a norm. Siblings, parents, even strangers in inns might talk in hushed voices about daily happenings, dreams, gossip, or complaints. These talks were quiet, sometimes intimate, and occasionally hilarious. There's even record of one British servant girl whispering her entire engagement story to her mother during the watch, complete with mimed reenactments that nearly knocked over the candle. Of course, some people got hungry. Midnight snack might not be a modern invention after all. In poorer homes, this meant gnawing on yesterday's crust of bread. In better-off households, a little heated broth, maybe some leftover pottage warmed over the coals. One French diary from 1762 mentions a man who regularly woke at 1 and took an egg, soft-boiled with salt and butter. Living the dream, right? Then there were the real overachievers, people who used this hour to work. And not out of punishment or misery, but out of routine. Women might spin wool or sew by firelight. Men might carve wood, mend tools, or check on livestock. A London baker from the 1780s famously claimed he did his best thinking during the watching hour and actually kneaded dough in near silence while the rest of the city snored. And then, brace yourself, some folks got social. If you lived in a dense urban centre or even a clustered rural village, there were records of neighbours paying little visits during the night. Discreet, brief visits, sure, but real. Maybe someone was sick, or there was a message to pass along, or someone needed to borrow a candle stub. In a time before phones, emails, or even postal reliability, This was sometimes the fastest way to get information across. Literally walk it there, between 1 and 3 a.m, under a moonlit sky. Now, one truly bizarre fringe practice, brace yourself, was potato peeling. Apparently in a few northern European regions, women would wake during the watch to quietly peel and prep root vegetables for the next day. The reason? Fire was still warm, light was just enough, and toddlers weren't yet underfoot. I mean, honestly, genius. What's fascinating is how ordinary this all was. There wasn't this obsession with sleep efficiency. No one was lying there panicking about why they were awake. Because being awake in the middle of the night, it wasn't broken. It was just life. Historians still argue whether this behaviour was a response to seasonal rhythms, since longer winter nights could stretch well beyond 12 hours, or whether people just genuinely preferred this bifurcated rest. Some say it was tied to farming culture, rest early, work late. Others suggest it was about maximising productivity in a world without electric timekeepers. But either way, it worked. Now, back to you. You're up. You've padded across the creaky floor, maybe added a log to the fire, and quietly pulled on an outer layer, perhaps a cloak or shawl, because yes, night air bites hard in this era. You're not groggy. You're just in between. You've read a bit of Psalms, or mended a sock, or eaten your weird boiled egg. And now it's time to settle in again. This return to bed isn't rushed. You're not timing it. There's no sleep tracker whispering about REM cycles or circadian alignment. You lie back down. Maybe your bed partner snores softly. Maybe the fire pops one last time. You pull the blanket back over your chest, shift once or twice, and feel yourself fall, softly, slowly, into the second sleep. This sleep is different. Richer Messier. Deeper into the subconscious. Dream heavy. People in the 18th century even said this second half was where the soul wandered, where visions lived, where the dead might whisper secrets or God might offer you a warning through symbolism only a dream book could decode. One woman wrote of seeing her late husband smiling beside a loaf of bread and a silver fish during second sleep. What it meant? Unclear. But she was convinced it was a message. Oh, and if you're wondering, yes, there were people who missed the watch, who slept through the whole night, but they were the exception, and sometimes people pitied them. Imagine that. Being pitied for having too much uninterrupted sleep. Can't relate. But for you, tonight, this second sleep is where the magic happens. You're not alone in your dreaming. All around you, other households are settling again. Faint noises fade. Breath evens out. In cities, you might hear a milk cart rattle past. In the countryside, an owl hoots once, then vanishes. The dream world calls. You stir again. But this time, not from your own restlessness. There's a noise, faint but familiar. A bell, a shout. Maybe just the wind through that loose shutter. It's still dark out, but the world around you is no longer asleep. Because here's something you didn't expect. The night isn't empty. In the 18th century, nighttime wasn't this quiet vacuum we imagine today. It was populated, alive, full of people doing things you probably wouldn't expect, things you definitely wouldn't want to bump into alone. You rise not because you're ready to start the day, but because something outside caught your attention. Through the crack in the window shutter, you see a dull lantern swaying. Then a figure, heavy cloak, slow step, a staff or perhaps a halberd. It's a night watchman, patrolling the street. You'd think having someone patrol the roads at night would be comforting, and it is, sort of, but it's also a little unnerving. Because if we need night watchmen, what exactly are they watching for? The answer, my half-asleep friend, is quite a bit. In cities, especially the sprawling messes of London, Paris and Vienna, night was the perfect cover for trouble. Thieves, highwaymen, petty criminals, they all flourished after dusk. A man might leave a tavern at midnight only to find his coin purse gone by the time he reached his door. A woman fetching water might vanish into a foggy alley, never to return. The dark had its own rules and its own rulers. Some towns employed official night men, whose duties were part watchman, part town crier, part human snooze button. They carried lanterns, shouted the hour, and sometimes added a gentle weather report. Past 1 o'clock, and a cold, clear night. It sounds charming, until you realise they also carried weapons and were legally allowed to whack you if you loitered suspiciously near a fence. So maybe don't dawdle. Historians still debate whether these watchmen were effective or mostly symbolic. Some argue they deterred real crime. Others suggest they were more decorative than defensive, especially after a few cups of ale. In fact, some city records mention watchmen being routinely bribed by local troublemakers to look the other way, or occasionally to nap the other way. But criminals weren't the only creatures stirring in the night. There were lovers too. Secret rendezvous didn't wait for sunlight. Letters were slipped under doors, liaisons arranged with coded knocks. The darkness wasn't just a veil for mischief. It was an opportunity for privacy, rebellion, and the occasional star-crossed tryst behind the bakery. Then there were travellers. Imagine this. You're a merchant making your way from village to town, hoping to reach a market by morning. You set out under the moon, lantern swinging, boots muddy, hoping to avoid both wolves and toll gates. Yes, wolves. In rural areas, especially in Eastern Europe and the French countryside, wolves weren't fairy tale relics. They were real threats. Packs occasionally roamed the edges of farmland, scavenging and sometimes attacking livestock, or people too slow to close a gate. And as for toll gates, those could be just as nasty. Closed at night unless you paid extra, and if you didn't pay, you waited in the cold until dawn. Sounds cosy. Of course, not everyone outside at night was dangerous. Some were just working. Bakers started their day long before sunrise, so did butchers, stable hands and coach drivers. If you lived near a mill, you might hear grinding begin just after the second sleep ended. The town was waking in shifts, one sleepwalker at a time. Now let's say you wander out, cloak wrapped tight, curiosity pulling you beyond the safety of your door. The air smells of soot, manure and wet leaves. A low fog curls around your ankles like a stray cat. You pass a shuttered inn, dim candlelight still leaking from behind thick curtains. Inside, a few patrons probably linger, whispering over dregs of ale or quietly snoring into their sleeves. You keep walking. Ahead, a faint metallic clank. It's the night soil men. Yes, the collectors of human waste. Armed with barrels and long-handled scoops, they move through the alleys, taking away the night's deposits from chamber pots left on doorsteps. It's foul work and surprisingly well paid. They operate like ghosts, here, then gone, before respectable society ever lays eyes on them. You pinch your nose. It doesn't help. And then there are the fringe elements, the really odd ones. A few amateur astronomers roam the streets wrapped in scarves, aiming telescopes skyward. Not nobles, mind you, eccentric clerks or retired tradesmen obsessed with Jupiter. They'll mutter about constellations and moon phases, sometimes recording notes by shaky candlelight. One famously fell into a canal while chasing a comet's reflection. He lived, but his telescope did not. Some women, widowed or impoverished, wandered the night selling oddities, dried herbs, charms, even love potions brewed from whatever was in the pantry. Were they witches? Not officially, but they leaned into the vibe. After all, a well-placed charm sold better if it came with a knowing wink and a raspy cackle. And don't forget the cats. They're everywhere. Seriously. In towns and cities, cats ruled the night, scratching at doors, howling in alleys, toppling whatever you left outside. They were both pest control and omens, good or bad, depending on who you asked. You wander back toward your home now, feet damp, breath fogging. You've seen enough to know. The night is not quiet, it's teeming with life. Shady deals, sacred rituals, and silent labours. It's all happening while most people dream. You shut the door behind you, latch it tight, and tiptoe back toward your straw mattress. You haven't been robbed or cursed or followed by a toothless apothecary. Good job. You lie down again, second sleep already tugging at your mind. But now you carry with you the memory of a different kind of night. One that doesn't just exist in shadows, but thrives in them. You're back in bed, but don't get too cozy yet. This isn't your private memory foam fortress. Oh no, this is the 18th century and privacy is a luxury you absolutely cannot afford. Literally. Because here's the truth. The bed is a battleground, and not just against cold or insomnia or that one lumpy spot in the straw ticking. It's a nightly struggle against who and what you're sleeping with. Let's start with the who. In this century, personal space is a concept reserved for royalty and very lucky cats. Most people share beds, and not just with their spouse. You might bunk with your siblings, your children, your in-laws, or even strangers. Yes, strangers. Picture this. You're a traveller stopping at a rural inn. There are 2 beds for 6 people. The innkeeper assigns you a side. Left pillow, bottom blanket, no negotiation. Your new bedfellow is a cobbler from Dover who smells faintly of onions and snored through the last plague. You nod politely and climb in. And believe it or not, this was normal. The phrase sleep tight came from the rope bed frame being pulled taut to support your mattress. But don't let the bedbugs bite. That's less a quaint saying and more a nightly warning. Because yes, bedbugs were rampant, and fleas, and lice, and in some very unfortunate places, rats, which by the way could chew through a boot if sufficiently motivated. Still, people adapted. They layered beds with straw ticking or feather mattresses if they were wealthy. The rest used old wool, rags, or hay. Linen sheets were prized and expensive. So many homes had only 1 or 2 sets, often passed down for generations like sacred heirlooms. Imagine inheriting a bedsheet from your great-aunt that she shared with her 5 siblings, the dream. You pull the coarse blanket up to your chin, careful not to breathe in too deeply through your nose. Your brother shifts beside you. His foot grazes yours. It's not malicious, it's just cramped. You deal with it. The alternative is sleeping on the floor or outside with the chickens, and they do not share well. In wealthier homes, bedrooms were slightly more refined. Servants might sleep in narrow beds tucked under staircases, or even beneath their masters' beds, like a living pull-out drawer. Children were often packed together in attic rooms, low ceilings, 1 window, no insulation, and exactly 0 dreams of a better future. And married couples? They shared beds. Yes, but even that wasn't always private. Curtains around the bed helped, but they weren't soundproof, and if the chambermaid needed to stoke the fire at midnight, well, hope you weren't mid-snog. Now for the what you were sleeping with. Let's talk insects. If you're squeamish, feel free to tense every muscle now. Bedbugs weren't just a nuisance, they were folklore legends. People told stories about them like modern ghost tales. One family claimed a single mattress moved on its own from the number of bugs writhing inside. Housewives boiled linens with lye, scorched straw ticking over fire, and painted bed frames with mercury-laced paint in a desperate effort to kill the little beasts, which, of course, poisoned them instead. Progress. Fleas were a constant companion, especially in colder months when animals were brought indoors for warmth. If you slept above the stables, or near your prized dairy goat, which some families absolutely did, you shared more than just heat. You shared bugs, all kinds. Historians still argue whether the density of co-sleeping made health problems worse, or simply normalised a level of filth we can't quite grasp today. Some say it helped build immune systems, others suggest it spread everything from scabies to smallpox like wildfire. The only clear conclusion, you were never really alone, ever, and yet people still found ways to be cosy, to claim ownership of sleep. They stitched initials into their pillowcases. They scented their beds with dried lavender or rosemary to mask the odour. One French farmer's journal lovingly describes his wife heating bricks wrapped in cloth and placing them at the foot of the bed each night to keep his feet warm. Romance, 18th century style. And believe it or not, some people paid to share a bed, not for romance, but for warmth. In colder towns, inns allowed the poor to pay a small fee to sleep beside a stranger just to avoid freezing. The term bed share wasn't some trendy Airbnb term, it was survival. Now there were elite exceptions. Nobles had separate bedchambers, thick velvet drapes, and actual privacy. Their sheets were changed more frequently. Their beds, enormous. Raised high off the floor to avoid drafts lined with furs, and sometimes decorated with fringe so aggressive it could double as a trap. Marie Antoinette reportedly had her own sleep chamber separate from the king, complete with guards posted at the door, because nothing says restful sleep like 3 men with halberds standing outside. But most people, you included, did what you could. You wrapped yourself tight, you hoped the straw wouldn't poke through, and you slept. Hard. It's easy to romanticize the past until you imagine the reality. Snoring, scratching, sneezing, and that moment when you realize someone just took the blanket. Again. But you manage. Because this was the world. This was sleep. Shared, flawed, tangled, and somehow still beautiful in its simplicity. You settle again. You block out the soft wheeze of the stranger to your left and the unmistakable snort of the stranger to your right. Your dreams, when they come, are oddly calm. Maybe it's the warmth. Maybe it's the exhaustion. Maybe it's the sheer relief that the candle didn't catch the curtain on fire. Either way, you're sleeping, and you're not alone. You don't always drift into sleep like a leaf on a pond. Sometimes your mind races, your body aches, or maybe the bread you ate was just a little too stale and now your stomach's staging a small rebellion. Whatever the reason, sleep in the 18th century wasn't guaranteed, so people reached for remedies. And let me tell you, these weren't your average sleepy teas and lavender pillow sprays. Welcome to the world of strange and smelly sleep aids. A place where if it reeked, tingled, or made you see stars, you probably rubbed it on your temples. You're sitting up right now, cross-legged on your straw mattress because you, dear sleeper, are having trouble nodding off. And just like many others in your time, you're about to try something. First up, vinegar compresses. The idea was that the sharp scent cleared the head and reset the nerves. You'd soak a cloth in vinegar, sometimes mixed with camphor or rose water, then lay it over your forehead or chest. It burned a little, it smelled worse. But for some it worked. At the very least it distracted you from your insomnia, especially when your bedmate started coughing violently from the fumes. Still awake? Time to move on to poppy syrup, basically opium mixed with sugar or honey. It was shockingly common even for children. Apothecaries handed it out like candy. The 1700s version of just take some NyQuil was have a spoonful of something wildly addictive that might also slow your breathing. Sweet dreams. Historians still argue whether people truly understood how dangerous poppy-based remedies were, or whether they simply didn't care. There's evidence that some doctors warned against regular use, while others prescribed it like it was herbal tea. One doctor swore it was the surest balm for any disturbance of the soul, which sounds poetic, until you realise he also prescribed leeches for everything from coughs to heartbreak. Still not drowsy? Don't worry, you have options. Warming plasters were a go-to for body aches that kept you up. These were pastes smeared onto cloth and strapped to the skin, usually made from mustard, horseradish, or even garlic. The idea was to heat the flesh and draw out bad humours, which in practice meant giving yourself a low-grade chemical burn in hopes that the pain would override your insomnia. Bold. Another popular approach, stuff your pillow with something weird. Herbs like chamomile, lavender and hops were common, but people also tried mint, dried orange peels, even crumbled biscuits. There's one 18th century folk remedy that suggests placing a piece of aged cheese under your pillow to encourage heavy dreams. Why cheese? Nobody knows. But if you've ever had a weird dream after a dairy binge, you're not alone across the centuries. And then, of course, there was bedroom fumigation. If you were really struggling, or if your insomnia was accompanied by a nasty cold, you might burn herbs or resins like frankincense or myrrh in the room before sleep. The thick, perfumed smoke was said to calm the humours and chase away bad spirits. It also choked out mosquitoes and occasionally oxygen. People used special braziers to safely contain the embers, unless they didn't, and then they accidentally set the bed curtains alight. Oops. Fringe tip. Some folks believed carrying a lump of lead in your pocket could help you sleep more soundly. Not touching your skin, just there, nestled in your garments, its heaviness symbolically grounding your spirit. Sort of like a weighted blanket if that blanket could poison you slowly over time. And here's a tender little quirk. Mothers sometimes sang the same lullabies to their children that they themselves were sung as infants. Not just melodies, but incantation-like verses thought to protect the child from restless spirits or night terrors. Sleep, in this world, wasn't just a bodily function, it was a spiritual act. Vulnerable, open, and possibly dangerous if left unguarded. That's why amulets and charms often appeared near beds, hung on cribs, tied to the headboard, stuffed into pockets. Some were religious, tiny crosses or stitched verses from psalms. Others were stranger, dried bat hearts, pressed wildflowers, rabbit feet, or coins rubbed on the gravestones of good sleepers. Yes, that was a thing. And then, brace yourself, there was self-bleeding. If you were particularly desperate and believed your insomnia stemmed from overheated blood, you might slice open a vein, usually the ankle or arm, and let out a few ounces. It was thought to restore balance. Of course, It also restored your awareness of just how much blood is supposed to stay in your body. You lie back down, having tried the vinegar, or the cheese, or both, your breath now a lovely mix of salad dressing and cheddar. You're still awake. So you do what people always do in every century. You stare at the ceiling. Except in this world, the ceiling is low, wooden, and possibly mouldy. A spider the size of your thumb clings to the corner. Somewhere in the house, a mouse shuffles through oat husks. You sigh, you pull the blanket tighter, and you start to hum. Maybe it's a lullaby your mother sang. Maybe it's just a tune you made up. Either way, the rhythm slows your breath. Your body still aches, but less. Or maybe you've just accepted it. Sleep finally arrives, not because you forced it, but because you've surrendered. You've tried everything short of goat sacrificing, and we'll get to that later, believe me. And now, even the strange smells and the itchy wool can't keep you from slipping under. You dream of cheese wheels chasing you through a misty field. Not surprising, really. The bells are ringing, faint at first, like distant chimes echoing across a foggy field, then clearer, deep, resonant, and in perfect time with the breath you didn't realize you were holding. 1, 2, 3 strikes of the bell. Somewhere, a monastery clock marks the hour. You stir beneath the covers. Not fully awake yet, but not asleep either. Because here in the 18th century, your nights are punctuated by more than just dreams. They're shaped by a very real and very noisy schedule. Welcome to the symphony of sacred time. Sleep, you see, wasn't entirely yours to control. If you lived near a religious order, especially Benedictine, Franciscan or Cistercian monks, your night was peppered with the sounds of bells calling the devout to prayer. The first chime might strike in the middle of your watch period. Others followed at matins, lauds, and eventually prime just before dawn. These weren't suggestions. These were divine summons. You roll over, blinking at the wooden rafters above you, listening to the rhythm. That low dong, dong. Dong is telling you something. Someone, somewhere, is up and moving, and not just for fun. They're working. Monks operated on a strict schedule called the Divine Office, which divided their day and night into hours of prayer and service. Midnight prayer? Absolutely. Vigils and matins? Set your candle. These men rose from their straw beds, donned coarse robes and shuffled down stone corridors by the light of a single torch to chant psalms in freezing chapels. Sounds holy, right? It was also brutally exhausting. But for many it wasn't just about God. It was about order, discipline, and taming the wild beast that is human sleepiness. And monasteries weren't alone. Town clocks echoed their rhythms, chiming the hours loudly enough to shake the birds from trees. Mill workers might be roused before dawn by a single sharp bell, called a knocker, struck outside their homes by designated human alarm clocks. Yes, that was a job. Imagine being the one whose role it is to bang on windows at 4 a.m. with a long stick while muttering, "Rise, you sluggish wretch!" Charming. And if you lived in a rural village without mechanical bells, you still had sound, roosters, church chimes rung by hand, a mother's voice, a neighbour's footsteps on gravel. The world itself told you when to wake and when to rest. But it wasn't all strict obedience. There were personal rituals too, especially in households touched by religion. You might kneel beside the bed, whisper a prayer before your second sleep, or keep a rosary tucked beneath your pillow. The line between sleep and sacred was blurred. Waking in the night was sometimes seen as a divine invitation to commune with God. One widow in Poland kept a candle perpetually burning by her bedside in case she was called to prayer between dreams, and if the bells weren't pulling you toward the divine, they were pushing you toward labour. Mills often operated by the demands of the grain, not the convenience of daylight. If the weather turned damp or the wheel froze, you adjusted. Sometimes that meant working through the night, stoking fires, drying flour, or turning gears by hand. You'd wake to the rhythmic creak of the grindstone turning, not your body's internal clock, and you'd fall asleep again not when you wanted, but when the grain was safe. Historians still debate whether this structure helped or harmed the body's natural rhythms. Some argue that scheduled bells kept people in tune with both work and worship, anchoring them in time and purpose. Others believe it fragmented rest so thoroughly that true recovery became impossible, especially for those living within earshot of multiple chapels. One writer in 1792 grumbled, "I would rather lie with wolves than beside a monastery's midnight bell." But there were upsides. People often use these bell chimes as emotional markers, moments to reflect, to mourn, or to celebrate. A newborn cry might be offered up at the same hour the monk sang psalms. A deathbed whisper might fade just as the dawn bell rang out. There was poetry in the pattern. Not every bell was a burden. Of course, not everyone was feeling inspired. Some rural folk found ways to ignore the bells entirely, stuffing rags in their ears, moving their beds to the far end of the cottage. One particularly clever family raised their livestock pens around the sleeping area, just so the snorting pigs and mooing cows would drown out the tolling. Sleep by pig. It's not for everyone, but hey, it's effective. Now imagine you're rising again, slowly, wrapped in your cloak, feet finding cold floor. The bells have done their job. You strike a flint, light a stub of candle, and blink into the room. Maybe you're heading to prayer. Maybe you're checking the grain stores. Maybe you're just sipping a mug of warm beer because, well, that's breakfast. Outside, the sky's shifting from ink to charcoal. The bell's final tone fades into mist. It's the 18th century, and your sleep is never entirely yours. It belongs to God, to grain, to the world of work and worship that hums beyond your dreams. But somehow, despite it all, you find rest. You return to bed, not for long, just a few more minutes. Maybe you'll catch a sliver of second sleep before dawn fully arrives. Or maybe you'll lie there, listening for another bell, another footstep, another call. Because here, sleep is both sacred and structured, and the night never really belonged to you alone. You finally settled back under the blanket, but let's not pretend we're all experiencing 18th century sleep equally. Because while you've been dealing with straw pokes, vinegar compresses, and possibly someone else's elbow in your ribs, there's a whole other class of sleeper out there, one whose pillowcases are monogrammed, whose nightcaps are embroidered, and whose idea of a nighttime disturbance is a maid walking too loudly in satin shoes. Yes, tonight you get to peek behind the heavy velvet curtains of the elite, the nobles, aristocrats, and upper crusts whose sleep was just as strange, but in a very different flavour. First off, let's talk about the bedroom. No low ceilings here, no crumbling plaster or leaky shingles. You walk, softly, through the wide halls of a country manor. Candles flicker in chandeliers overhead. The floorboards are polished so hard they squeak like mice. And the bedroom, enormous, with a bed so tall it requires steps, literally a 3-step stool to climb aboard. You'd think they were sleeping on a mountain. And the bed, oh, the bed. Carved canopy, embroidered hangings, and so many pillows you could stage a theatrical production. These were not just for comfort, they were for display. A noble's bed was a symbol of power, lineage, and taste. It wasn't just where you slept, it was where you gave birth, where you hosted visitors, and occasionally where you died dramatically in candlelight while a priest whispered Latin beside you. And yet, despite all the wealth, aristocratic sleep was often terrible. Why? Because privacy wasn't guaranteed, not even for the elite. In many noble households, it was standard to have servants sleeping in the same room, tucked behind screens or inside alcoves. Chambermaids, footmen, wet nurses. They all hovered nearby in case you needed to be turned over, tucked in, or handed your warmed slipper at 2 a.m. Convenience, sure, but restful, not so much. Even worse, many nobles were subject to the era's idea of good health practices. That included bedroom ventilation, which meant windows cracked open even in winter, because stale air was thought to poison the blood. One French duchess famously slept in a fur-trimmed mask and gloves to survive the nightly draught. Cosy. You, lounging now in your borrowed silk nightgown, might notice something else, the smell. While the poor used vinegar and herbs, the rich preferred perfumes, heavy perfumes, the kind that punch you in the face and then hang around until the will is read. Elite sleepers dabbed their pillows with scented oils, jasmine, rose, or even ambergris, which, fun fact, is aged whale vomit. Sleep well. And if you couldn't sleep, oh, you had options. Some nobles had live-in physicians who would prescribe custom tinctures for sleeplessness. These included everything from poppy distillates to powdered pearls mixed into wine. Yes, crushed pearls, because nothing says, I have too much money, like sipping your jewellery in a goblet of insomnia. Others preferred sleep rituals. Warm milk and honey brought in by a maid. A chapter of Virgil read aloud by a governess. Or If you were feeling a bit extra, the latest gossip whispered by your favourite valet. A little midnight drama never hurt anyone, unless you were the one being gossiped about. And let's not forget the dream interpreters. Some elites believed dreams were messages, divine prophecies or warnings wrapped in strange symbols. If you dreamt of a black dog or a crumbling tower, you'd consult with your household astrologer the next morning. They'd flip through their leather-bound guide and declare something suitably ominous like, "Beware a visitor from the east." You'd nod gravely and then forget it entirely by lunch. Historians still argue whether these elite sleep habits were healthier or just fancier forms of chaos. Some claim the rich slept better due to softer beds and easier lives. Others point to constant nighttime interruptions, rigid schedules, and the pressure of performance, even in sleep. After all, if your bedchamber was part of your social identity, you couldn't just curl up in a ball and snore. That would be uncouth. Now, one truly odd elite custom? Public rising. In some royal courts, waking up was a spectacle. Take Versailles, for example, where King Louis XIV conducted his lever, a formal morning ceremony during which nobles were invited to witness him wake, be washed, and get dressed. This wasn't about intimacy. It was politics. Access to the king's bedchamber meant status. Imagine dozens of people crowding around while you yawn and try to scratch your leg politely. No pressure. But there were smaller, subtler rituals too. A wealthy English lady might rise with a soft bell rung by her maid. A tray of warmed milk and sliced fruit awaited her. Curtains drawn back, fire stoked, slippers placed precisely where her feet would land. It wasn't just sleep, it was theatre. And then there were sleeping arrangements in noble marriages, which were complicated. Sharing a bed was common for appearances, but not always for affection. In some households, couples had separate rooms entirely, and yes, this included royal couples. Sleep was about rest, status, and reproduction, not cuddling. If you wanted cuddling, you had to schedule it. Now imagine yourself slipping between those velvet sheets, the embroidered LH on the pillow a reminder that nothing here is yours. You lie flat, arms neatly positioned, the way you imagine the Duchess would. But even with all the finery, the noise is still there. Somewhere in the hallway a servant sneezes. The wind taps at the casement. You wonder if you'll sleep at all. Eventually you do, and when you dream, it's lavish and absurd. Just like everything else in this gilded chamber. You're riding a horse made of lace, your blanket sings lullabies. The pearl dust is probably working its magic. You may not belong here, but for one night, you've tasted elite sleep. Turns out, it's not always better, just fluffier. You awaken, not to the chime of a bell or the clatter of a chamber pot lid, but to something much less predictable, the warbling cry of a toddler shouting into the void of a pre-dawn house. And just like that, your noble fantasy dissolves. You're back in the real 18th century now, sharing space, sound, and probably half your bedding with the most erratic sleepers in history, children. And let's be clear, kids in the 1700s didn't sleep like clockwork. They were not neatly tucked in with glowing night lights and white noise machines. Nope. They fell asleep where they fell over, on sacks of flour, in the ashes near the hearth, curled up in someone else's coat. 1 minute they're suckling peacefully, the next they're shrieking like tiny banshees because someone stole their turnip doll. You groan softly and sit up. The child is now thumping across the floor in your direction. Great. Infant sleep. Chaotic. And forget sleep training. Most babies in this era co-slept with their mothers, usually out of necessity, warmth, and the sheer survival instinct of not letting your baby freeze. In wealthier homes, a nursemaid or wet nurse might be tasked with soothing the baby at night, but in most households, the task fell to the family, meaning you. Yes, you, who were hoping for 4 more minutes of sleep. A mother would nurse her baby through the watch period, often without fully waking. Some babies fell asleep to the rhythm of walking, a parent or sibling pacing the length of a narrow cottage floor, and if they didn't stop crying, people had tricks. One common method: a cloth dipped in poppy syrup tied around a thumb or a pacifier-like bit of linen. Yes, essentially a baby opiate lozenge. Just the thing to keep Junior asleep until sunrise, or until everyone decided a little screaming was preferable to accidental overdosing. Historians still debate how common these substances were among the lower classes. Some records suggest frequent use, others claim they were reserved for the desperate or the elite. But one thing is clear, sleep deprivation wasn't a modern invention, it just wore rougher linen, and the older kids, equally unpredictable. Most children didn't have their own rooms, they shared space, sometimes a bed, sometimes a blanket, and sometimes just the floor, with siblings, cousins, or whoever else needed a place to crash. A family of 6 might all sleep in the same room, limbs tangled like laundry, with a dog or goat curled against someone's feet for warmth. Honestly, no one knew where one child ended and another began until breakfast. And bedtime routines? You'd maybe get a lullaby if your caregiver wasn't completely exhausted, or a whispered story about a forest spirit who steals naughty children in the night. Soothing. By the way, children didn't always go to bed in any formal sense. They'd nod off mid-activity, during dinner, on someone's lap mid-sentence. Then they'd be scooped up and tucked somewhere semi-soft. Sleep was less a choreographed ballet, and more a constant game of where did we last see Georgie. During the watch, some kids even woke up and played quietly, stacking kindling, whispering stories, or peeking outside to watch the moon. It wasn't always discouraged. As long as they weren't making noise, nobody cared. But if they cried or fussed, that was everyone's problem. In a one-room house, one scream could wake 7 people and 2 chickens. You glance over now and see that the toddler has climbed into someone's half-abandoned bed. She curls up without a word, already drifting off again. She'll be awake in an hour, probably hungry, definitely sticky. And then there's the wild card, teething babies. The sleep saboteurs of the century. Parents used everything from cold rags to wooden gum sticks to soothe the pain. One mother in Denmark reportedly used a frozen onion wrapped in cloth. The child smelled like soup, but apparently it worked. Let's not forget the accidental sleep dangers. Open fires, heavy blankets, candlelit cradles, all part of the nighttime environment. Parents did their best, but child mortality was tragically high. Some families tied strings from the cradle to the bed frame so they could rock the baby without getting up. Genius, but risky if someone forgot and tripped over it in the dark. You can almost hear the thud. And yet somehow these children survived. They grew, they adapted, and often they slept better than the adults around them. Their bodies, unburdened by stress or wine hangovers or gouty ankles, slipped into sleep the way a pebble sinks in water. Sometimes they even dreamed aloud, muttering nonsense, laughing, or calling out to imaginary creatures. One boy famously woke crying about a straw lion he claimed had bitten him on the toe. No one ever figured out what that meant. Probably just Tuesday. Historians still argue over how much children were supposed to sleep in this era. With no clocks in most homes, schedules were fluid. Some scholars suggest kids napped often, sprawled across midday hay piles, or cradled in someone's apron while chores continued. Others believe sleep was squeezed in where it fit, stolen in moments, traded like coins. You lie back now, staring at the dark rafters. The child next to you snores softly. Another one talks in their sleep, muttering something about bread. And for a moment, despite the chaos, despite the noise, it feels kind of peaceful. This is family sleep, not perfect, not private, but connected. A shared rhythm, a haphazard harmony. No blackout curtains, no sleep hygiene. Just bodies finding rest where they can. You close your eyes. You might get another hour, or just 7 more minutes. Either way, you're grateful. You're stirring again. Don't worry. It's not a child this time. It's something else. Something heavier. You feel it in your chest, that subtle pressure that tells you. Someone's judging you. Someone with a powdered wig and strong opinions about how long you've been lying in bed. Because in the 18th century, sleep wasn't just a personal matter, it was moral. People didn't just talk about how you slept, they evaluated it. Sleep too much and you were a sloth. Too little. A maniac. It was a tightrope walk between sin and sainthood. You sit up, bleary-eyed, and there it is. Your grandmother's voice echoing in your head. Or maybe a preacher's, warning that idleness breeds wickedness. Which is pretty bold, considering you were just trying to catch some rest between livestock feedings and dodging smallpox. Let's start with religion. In this world, God is always watching, and your mattress behaviour might just be part of your eternal performance review. Protestant ethics especially prized early rising as a sign of virtue. To be upright and working before dawn was to prove yourself industrious and blessed. Sleep late, Well, clearly you had something to hide. One sermon from 1763 called Sleep the Devil's Blanket. Cosy, yes, but also a trap for the soul. Another minister warned that sleeping past sunrise allowed the devil to enter by the eyes and escape by the mouth, which raises a lot of biological questions, honestly. And if you thought the church was bad, wait till you hear from the philosophers. Enlightenment thinkers were obsessed with self-discipline, moderation and balance. They didn't outright condemn sleep, but they did treat it like an indulgence, something to be rationed carefully. Benjamin Franklin famously advised going to bed early and rising early to be healthy, wealthy and wise, which sounds nice until you realise he also took midday air baths while stark naked. Different times. But here's the twist. At the same time that sleep was demonised, it was also sacred. For some, dreams were divine messages. Sleep was a space where your soul could receive instruction, warnings, even prophecy. In Catholic and Orthodox communities, saints were said to appear during sleep, offering comfort or direction. Sleep wasn't just rest, it was a spiritual channel. One farmer in Bavaria claimed the Virgin Mary visited him in a dream and told him to stop beating his mule. He listened. The mule lived a long and extremely smug life. Historians still argue whether this dual view, sleep as sin and sleep as sanctity, was a contradiction or just another example of humans making things complicated. Some believe it reflected deeper class divides. The poor were accused of laziness, while the wealthy were permitted restorative leisure. Others think it was simply the result of everyone being really, really tired and trying to justify it. Whatever the case, it led to some odd sleep behaviours. People would sometimes pretend to wake earlier than they did, just to appear virtuous. A housemaid might ring the bell at dawn even if her mistress didn't need anything, just to prove she was up. A merchant might send a servant out with a letter just before sunrise, not because it was urgent, but to show the neighbours how industrious he was. Performative sleepiness, 18th century edition. There were also journals and diaries filled with sleep guilt. One woman wrote, "I lay abed until near 7, slothful and ungrateful." Another lamented, "Woke late and dreamed of frivolities." Am I losing my soul? Honestly, someone give these people a blanket and a permission slip. Now, one truly fringe belief, that dreams could be weighed for moral content. There were pamphlets and guides instructing readers on how to interpret whether their dreams were holy, sinful, or just indigestion. Dreamt of flying. That could mean spiritual elevation or arrogance. Dreamt of eating too much bread. You were warned to beware gluttony. Dreamt of dancing. Well, scandalous. Unless the dance was with an angel, then it was fine. And just to keep things extra confusing, some preachers insisted that too much sleep was a sign of demonic influence. That's right. If you regularly overslept, it might not be laziness. It might be Lucifer spooning you from behind, cozy and cursed. Still, despite the judgment, people needed rest, and they knew it. Workers might sneak naps during the day, especially in fields, barns, or under wagons. Children could curl up mid-task and no one blinked. But adults? You had to make it look like you were praying, meditating, or simply contemplating grain prices with your eyes closed. You lie back now, thinking about your own dreams. They weren't sinful, not really, just odd. Something about a pig in a powdered wig chasing you through a barley field. Maybe symbolic, maybe just pork anxiety. But you wonder, was your dream trying to tell you something? Was it a message, a warning, or just your brain doing what brains do when left unsupervised for 7 hours? The truth is, no one knows. Sleep in the 18th century was burdened with expectations. Be rested, but not lazy. Dream, but not too weirdly. Rise early, but don't look smug about it. Everyone had opinions, everyone had advice, and very few people were actually sleeping well enough to follow any of it. But tonight, you've done your best. You've honoured the sacred, avoided the sinful, barely, and managed to avoid Lucifer's cuddle trap. That's a win. Close your eyes now. Let the sermons fade. Let the guilt dissolve. Sleep belongs to you too. You're back under the covers now, deep in the second sleep. That strange, almost enchanted stretch before dawn where the dreams get weird. Not just talking dog-wearing breeches weird, but deep, tangled, symbolic weird. And here in the 18th century, those dreams, they mean something. Or at least that's what everyone around you believes. Welcome to the wonderfully unhinged world of dream interpretation gone wild. You twitch as your dream self opens a cupboard that leads to a sea. A three-eyed goose honks twice. Someone's shouting about muffins. And when you wake, gasping quietly into your musty linen pillow, you do what any respectable person of this era would do. You try to decode it like a secret message from the beyond. Because for 18th century folks, dreams weren't just sleepy brain static. They were signs, divine nudges, warnings from the cosmos, or maybe a tip-off that your neighbour was definitely hiding something in the root cellar. Dream interpretation was everywhere. There were dream books, pamphlets, and entire pocket-sized almanacs dedicated to helping you unpack that nightmare about losing all your teeth in front of a fox wearing your grandfather's wig. Spoiler, that one means someone's lying to you, or you're about to get a letter, or both. One of the most popular dream guides was the Royal Dream Book, which promised to unfold the mysteries of the night and offer prudent warnings for the days ahead. It was organised alphabetically, so if you dreamed of apples, you could look it up and find apples, a sign of temptation or profit depending on ripeness. Delicious and morally ambiguous. Let's say you dreamed of water. Could mean cleansing, rebirth, or impending doom, depending on whether it was still or moving. Dreamed of death. Don't panic. It often meant a new beginning. Unless you saw your own coffin, then maybe panic a little. And dreams about animals? Or you were practically having a conversation with fate. A black dog meant treachery. A white horse was usually good. A snake, always sketchy. But if the snake smiled, then congratulations. You were either about to inherit money or get pregnant. Or both, somehow. One particularly detailed pamphlet claimed that if you dreamt of losing your hat, you would be embarrassed publicly within the week. Which is hilarious considering how windy it was and how much people actually lost their hats. Honestly, that one was probably just solid meteorological advice. Now let's talk about the dream experts. The people who made a living decoding your nocturnal nonsense. There were folk seers, cunning men, and women who, for a small fee, would read your dream and offer remedies or prayers. You'd show up at their cottage, describe your bizarre sleep vision, and they'd nod solemnly and say, "Ah, yes, that was no ordinary duck. You're clearly being followed by a spirit who dislikes your cousin's choice in suitors." Fair enough. These local interpreters weren't just entertaining, they held influence. Their readings could change behaviour. People would delay marriages, avoid travel, or suddenly become very nice to that neighbour they dreamed was chasing them with a butter churn. Some aristocrats even had personal dream advisors, like spiritual consultants. One Hungarian countess reportedly refused to buy new horses without checking with her dream counsellor first. Because nothing says confidence like choosing livestock based on how many onions you juggled in your dream. But not everyone agreed on what dreams meant. Historians still argue whether people genuinely believed dreams were supernatural, or if they were simply using them as a psychological tool. Pre-Freudian therapy sessions with added goose feathers and fewer couches. Even medical practitioners weighed in. Some believed dreams were a byproduct of indigestion, bad air, or unbalanced bodily humours. One theory claimed that a dream of falling indicated excess yellow bile, and recommended a light purge. Others said spicy food before bed could trigger visions, so if you dreamt of fire, you probably overdid the mustard. Oh, and don't forget dream incubation, the act of intentionally seeking dreams for answers. Some religious folk would pray before bed asking for guidance, then sleep in a specific position, often on their right side, hoping the correct dream would come. If they didn't get one, they blamed the devil, or beans. There were also dreams that were considered prophetic, and taken very seriously. Entire communities might panic if multiple people dreamed of the same thing. Famine, war, or plague were said to announce themselves in shared dreams. One village in Wales reportedly held a fast day after 3 farmers all dreamed of a bloodied lamb standing in the churchyard. Nothing happened, but the lamb got a reputation it definitely didn't deserve. Of course, there were always skeptics. Some Enlightenment thinkers dismissed dreams as mental noise, arguing they were meaningless flashes of stored memory and imagination. One essayist called them the idle winds of slumber, signifying neither truth nor trouble, which is fancy talk for chill out about the dancing fox already. Still, most people held on to belief. You, now drifting into your own dream space again, start to feel the edges blur. The fire's glow fades, You feel the world give way, and just before sleep overtakes you, your mind forms a scene. You're sitting in a field of books, each one glowing. A cow walks by in a powdered wig and says, "It's time." You nod, "Of course it is." You'll wake later, unsure if it meant anything. But maybe, just maybe, you'll feel comforted or inspired. Or depending on your dream guide, you'll expect a surprise visitor and check your hat for feathers. Because here, in this world, dreams aren't just dreams, they're messages. And you are always listening. You open your eyes again, this time not because of a dream or a toddler foot to the ribs, but because your brain just won't shut up. It's 3:12 a.m, give or take, and you're wide awake for absolutely no good reason. Welcome, my friend, to the 18th century version of insomnia before Netflix. Let's face it, even without smartphones, caffeine addiction, or that one email you forgot to answer at 5 p.m, people in the 1700s still lay awake at night staring at the rafters and wondering why the universe chose this precise hour to unleash an avalanche of thoughts like, did I forget to close the chicken coop? Did I offend the baker's wife? What if God is mad at me for stealing that egg 6 months ago? Insomnia wasn't called that, of course. The term wouldn't become common until later. People just said things like, my rest did not come, or the hours were long and troubled, which frankly sounds more poetic than I lay there thinking about soup for 2 hours. You sit up now, slowly, blanket still wrapped around your shoulders like a shroud. There's no clock ticking beside you, just darkness, just stillness, just your own thoughts doing cartwheels in your head. And here's the thing, no one thought this was especially odd. Restlessness was a known companion. If you were lucky, you'd roll over and drift back down like a sleepy anchor. But if not, you had options. Not modern options, of course. There's no rerun of Bridgerton or a midnight fridge raid for string cheese, but there were strategies. One option, get up and write a letter. Yes, people did this. There are piles of letters from the 18th century time-stamped in the wee hours, written by candlelight, full of half-coherent ramblings. Some read like anxious confessions. Others were love letters so intensely poetic they'd make a romance novelist blush. One widower wrote to his late wife every night at 2 a.m. for a year. The letters were never mailed, just stacked in a drawer, folded carefully like bandages. Another approach? Reading. If you were literate and owned even a single book, this might be the perfect moment. Bible verses were a popular choice, comforting, rhythmic, and always available. But there were other favourites too. Collections of fables, moral tales, dream interpretation guides, of course, or even books of medical advice, which always promised you had too much phlegm no matter your complaint. And then there was quiet snacking. Not a 4-course meal, obviously, but nibbling on a crust of bread or sipping something warm, milk, broth, or very watered-down ale, was completely acceptable. In fact, some believed that digestion could calm the body and reset the sleep cycle. So if you're sitting now beside the fire, slowly chewing a piece of dry rye and trying not to wake anyone, congratulations, you're practicing historical sleep hygiene. There's also pacing, just walking. People would shuffle quietly across their rooms, or out into a corridor, or even outside if it wasn't too cold. One account describes a farmer in Sweden who would take 3 slow laps around his cottage when sleep wouldn't come, touching each wall in turn like some kind of nocturnal spell. No one knows if it worked, but it certainly didn't hurt. Then there were the weird ones. One remedy advised wrapping your feet in cabbage leaves to draw the excess energy downward. Another involved sniffing roasted onion skins to cleanse the mind. If that didn't work, you could rub your temples with goose fat. At a certain point, it's hard to tell if these were sleep remedies or pranks someone put in a book just to see if people would actually do them. Historians still debate whether 18th century insomnia was physiological, cultural, or both. Some say it was a natural byproduct of segmented sleep, that waking in the middle of the night was part of the deal. Others suggest that anxiety, malnutrition, or chronic pain were major players. After all, if your mattress is made of hay, and you spent the day hauling grain sacks, your body probably isn't resting so much as screaming quietly. One fringe theory. That dreams themselves caused insomnia. People would wake in a panic, afraid they'd seen something prophetic, or worse, something shameful. A dream of falling might keep you from sleep for the rest of the night. Not because you were scared, but because you were convinced it meant something bad was coming. You'd lie awake, waiting for the metaphor to show up at your door. And then there was the simple fact that some people like the quiet. A blacksmith's wife once wrote in her journal, "Only in the night does my mind walk freely." That's something we still understand, right? There's a certain clarity in the silence, in being the only soul awake, in feeling the world dimmed down to a whisper, just you and the flickering fire and whatever thoughts decide to visit. So maybe you're lying there now, not because you can't sleep, but because, on some strange level, you don't want to. Not yet. The bed creaks softly as you shift. You trace shapes in the shadowed ceiling beams. You listen to someone snore gently 3 feet away. It's not peaceful in the conventional sense, but it is human, familiar, timeless. And eventually, without realizing it, your breathing slows. The fire dies down to a single ember. Your hand loosens its grip on the blanket. You stop thinking about soup. You fall asleep again. Not because you tried, but because you stopped trying. There is no Netflix here, just your own quiet rhythm. And finally, a little rest. You don't wake this time on your own. There's a sound, faint, mechanical, rhythmic, something you've never heard in your 18th century nights before. A low metallic clack, 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 echoing across the early morning fog. It's not a bell, it's not a rooster, it's progress. You sit up, squinting through the gloom. Outside, just beyond the trees, a faint orange glow pulses against the horizon. Not the sun, not a fire, it's something else, something new. The wheels of change are literally turning, because in this moment, you've stumbled into a world on the cusp of transformation. This is where sleep begins to lose its centuries-old rhythm. This is where night becomes negotiable. Welcome to the slow but relentless arrival of industrial sleep disruption. For hundreds of years, the body ruled the clock. Sleep came when the sun left and work resumed when the light returned. But now, time is no longer just a feeling. It's a machine, and it's ticking. You shuffle to the window and rub at the glass with your sleeve. In the distance, you see it, a textile mill, the newest addition to your town, powered by steam, belching smoke, and, most important of all, running all night. Before, darkness meant rest. Now it means shifts. Industrialization didn't just bring factories, it brought the restructuring of sleep itself. For the first time, labour wasn't just tied to daylight, it was tied to the clock. Employers began assigning workers to rotating schedules, some by day, some by night. Your second sleep might have to wait, or disappear entirely. Historians still argue whether this was the true death knell of segmented sleep. Some say the shift work schedules, especially in England's booming textile towns, forced people into a consolidated 8-hour block for efficiency. Others argue that families held onto the old patterns far longer, dozing after dusk, waking in the night, then sleeping again, until the factory whistle finally snapped them out of it. You can feel the difference, even if you can't name it yet. There's pressure now. The candles burn longer. The hearth is stoked at odd hours. Your neighbour's son, newly employed at the mill, stumbles home at 3 a.m, soot-faced and silent. He used to sleep beside you. Now he collapses onto a cot and barely moves until dusk. His sleep no longer follows the sun, it follows the boss's schedule, and it's not just the workers. The presence of artificial light, even in the most modest homes, begins to blur the edges of sleep. Oil lamps, whale-fat lanterns, and eventually gaslight, all extend the day artificially. Families stay awake later, eat later, talk later. That early-to-bed lifestyle you lived for so long. It's being nudged later and later, hour by hour. In London, whole neighbourhoods buzz after dark now. Gaslit streets glow amber. Pubs spill over with workers on evening breaks. Horses clop through fog at midnight. A man might buy a newspaper at 10 p.m. Something unimaginable just a few decades earlier. One fringe thinker at the time feared that industrialization would erase night entirely. That seems dramatic until you realise he wasn't wrong. Night, once a sacred, restful realm, was being colonised by productivity. And it wasn't just the hours, it was the attitude towards sleep that began to shift. Rest began to be seen as unproductive, a luxury, something that, if you were tough enough, you could minimise. Factory foremen praised strong men, who could get by on 5 hours and still operate a loom without mangling their hands. Sleep became a thing to be defeated, not embraced. You glance at your bedding now, messy, warm, familiar, and you feel it. The pressure. You should be doing something. Anything. Rest feels indulgent in a way it didn't just a few years ago. Even the language changes. Instead of 2 sleeps, people begin talking about 1. A long, uninterrupted sleep, preferably just enough to refresh but not enough to waste time. Diaries from the 1790s start dropping the term first sleep. It vanishes gradually, like a superstition people stopped mentioning out loud. Families adapt. Children are taught to stay in bed longer or stay up later. Workers learn to ignore their body's natural rhythms and follow bells, horns and whistles instead. The body no longer gets to decide, it just obeys. You wrap your blanket around yourself and tiptoe toward the hearth. The embers are still warm. You're tired, but you know that someone in your household will be waking soon for a shift. You hear footsteps, soft, heavy, deliberate. The change is happening all around you, and it's not all bad. More people are employed. Food is more plentiful. Coal arrives by cartloads. There's even talk of something called a railroad, a metal road with no horses. But with this progress comes a quiet loss. Sleep, once personal, communal, spiritual and elastic, is slowly becoming transactional. Fitted in. Don't talk about it. Don't dream too loud. Historians still debate exactly when the modern sleep schedule was born. Some point to the 1790s. Others say not until the mid-1800s, when trains and factory clocks truly cemented the tyranny of time. But for you, this moment feels like the beginning of something, and the end of something else. You lie back down, trying to recapture the old rhythm, trying to fall into that comforting 2-part slumber your ancestors knew. But the new rhythm is in your bones now. The idea that you should be awake, even if there's nothing to do. The creeping guilt of idleness. Outside, the mill clanks to life again. Inside, your eyes stay open a little longer than they used to. You'll sleep again. But it'll be different now, and the night will never be quite the same. You're not sure if you slept, or if you just laid there, blinking at shadows and trying not to think about the factory bell. Either way, the room is brighter now. Someone's stirring. The world is warming up, and your rest, whatever version of it you managed, is done. But let's say you hadn't slept well. Maybe your dreams were riddled with ominous goats again. Maybe your legs wouldn't stop twitching. Maybe you're convinced your liver has been offended. Good news. Help is available. Bad news. The 18th century medical system is not exactly what you'd call reassuring. Because now, as you blink into the daylight, we step into the realm of doctors, quacks, and utterly baffling sleep theories. First off, sleep, as understood by the average physician in this era, was a bodily function tied deeply to your humours, those mysterious bodily fluids they believed governed everything from mood to illness. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If you had too much or too little of one, your sleep could suffer. Too much black bile, you were melancholic and prone to restless nights. Too much phlegm, you'd sleep too heavily and wake groggy. The solution? Balance, of course. Which usually meant bloodletting, vomiting, or a really unfortunate enema. You, lying in bed now, might be declared biliously disordered by a physician with an oversized powdered wig and a suspicious interest in your stool consistency. His remedy? A good bleeding. Just a little, half a pint or so, nothing dramatic. Enough to cool the blood and allow better rest. Historians still argue whether these treatments ever truly helped, or just mildly distracted people from their original discomfort by introducing new ones. Some even suggest the placebo effect played a big role. After all, it's hard to think about your dreams when you're dizzy from blood loss. But not all treatments were so leaky. One common sleep prescription was dietary adjustment. Eat lighter in the evenings, avoid windy vegetables like cabbage or beans, increase warm milk, decrease vinegar. Some doctors even advised against bread with too much crust, as it was thought to cause unease in the belly that might disrupt dreams. Still can't sleep? Try a posset, a warm drink made of milk curdled with ale or wine, spiced with nutmeg. Supposedly soothing, and definitely weird. If that didn't work, try swallowing powdered coral or a bit of crushed oyster shell. Was it nutritious? Not really. but it felt vaguely alchemical, and that was enough. And then there were the quacks, the unlicensed, the wandering, the hopeful. These were your neighbourhood sleep dealers, peddling elixirs from carts, pushing tinctures through back doors, advertising with posters that claimed things like Sir Humphrey's Lunar Drops, for the soothing of dreams, the quieting of women, and the discouragement of demonic visitation. Honestly, 10 out of 10 for confidence. These concoctions range from harmless herbal infusions to full-blown narcotics. Laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, was particularly popular. It was sold openly, prescribed often, and consumed by everyone from fretful housewives to poets with dramatic hats. It worked, until it didn't. You roll onto your side, still groggy, imagining what it must have been like to fall asleep each night not with melatonin gummies, but with a spoonful of something brewed in a rusty tin kettle by a man who thinks your spleen has opinions. And then there were the animal treatments. Yes, animals. Some physicians swore by goat's milk, fresh and warm, sipped before bed. Others went further, recommending people sleep with animals, not just for warmth, but for energy transfer. A chicken in your room might calm your nerves. A cat across your feet? Perfect for draining nightmares. One particularly committed, Reed, unhinged, sleep theorist in Prague once recommended wrapping a live hair in linen and placing it gently on the chest of an insomniac. The twitching of the animal shall draw the spirits to balance, he wrote. The hare did not comment. Then there were the philosophical doctors, less about potions, more about posture. They believed the way you slept mattered more than when or why. You were told to lie on your right side first, then turn to your back, never your stomach, and absolutely never with your arms above your head, lest you invite demons into your joints. I'm not making that up. Demon joints. That was a theory. Some of these doctors recommended beds with specific materials, not just straw, but certain kinds of wool, dried moss, or even ash-stuffed bolsters. Others claimed the direction of your bed was crucial. Face east, toward the sunrise, and your sleep would be clean and moral. Face west, and you'd wake grumpy, spiritually vulnerable, and possibly left-handed. And yet, despite the weirdness, some practices actually edged toward modern logic. People were encouraged to maintain a regular sleep schedule, to avoid sudden waking, to limit stimulants like strong wine, coffee, which was catching on, and excessive storytelling before bed. Some even promoted gentle evening walks and relaxation rituals, albeit involving a lot more sheep intestines than we'd recommend today. Still, you lie back, taking comfort in the fact that at least no one has insisted you sleep on a cold marble slab or wear a chicken pelt hat to bed. Yet. The truth is, medicine was still guessing. People were experimenting, theorizing, scribbling in notebooks by candlelight, trying to figure out what we still struggle with, why some people fall asleep easily and others wrestle with shadows. But in this curious era, one thing is clear. They cared, deeply, about dreams, about rhythms, about what sleep meant. Even when they got it wrong, they were trying to understand what you've been feeling all night. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't that far off. You're finally drifting again now, a little amused, a little awed, and a little grateful no one's hovering nearby with a goat and a scalpel. Just you, your dreams, and the soft hush of a world still half asleep. It's morning now. Not the sudden burst of neon blue you're used to, but a soft unveiling, a slow exhale of gold and grey, slipping through wooden shutters and brushing across your face like a memory. The fire has long since gone out. The room smells of old wool, wood smoke, and just a hint of cabbage. You've made it. But before you pull back the blanket and return to the noisy world of clattering buckets and grumbling animals, we linger here, one last moment in bed, wrapped in the last whispers of a long-forgotten rhythm. Because the question hangs in the cool morning air like mist. Did we lose the better sleep? You stretch, slowly. Your muscles ache in a familiar, lived-in kind of way. You didn't sleep uninterrupted. You stirred. You dreamed. You woke. You listened to the wind and the children and the mill and the bells. But somehow, it feels like your body did what it was built to do. That two-part rhythm, that strange segmented sleep, is gone for most of us now. Electric light changed everything. Then factories, then trains, then phones, schedules, alarms. The middle of the night watch turned from a sacred pause into something we medicate away or anxiously Google. Why am I awake at 3 a.m? Do I have worms? Historians still debate whether we're meant to sleep in one long stretch or two neat halves. Some claim the two-sleep model was purely circumstantial, born of dark winters and long nights. Others believe it was deeply natural, the way our ancestors slept for tens of thousands of years. A rhythm lost not by choice, but by force. What's clear is this. The people who lived it didn't see it as broken. They accepted it, expected it, even built rituals around it. The wakeful hour wasn't a curse, it was an opportunity. To pray, to talk, to think, to dream more vividly. They made peace with the pause. You roll onto your back now, thinking of how far removed we are from that world. Our beds are better, our rooms quieter. Well, usually. And yet sleep remains elusive. It slips away, no matter how expensive the mattress or how advanced the app tracking our REM cycles. We chase sleep like it owes us something, like it's a delivery that never arrives on time. But maybe the people of the 18th century knew something we've forgotten, that sleep isn't supposed to be a perfect performance. It's messy, rhythmic, personal. It bends to our lives and changes with the seasons. Some nights are heavy, others fractured. And in the gaps, there's room to breathe, to reflect, to listen to the house creak and the world turn. One fringe philosopher, a German shoemaker turned mystic, once wrote, "Sleep comes in waves, and the soul floats between." He meant it metaphorically, probably, but also, maybe not. You sit up, feet touching the cool floor. The rest of the house is beginning to stir. A pot clangs. A rooster crows fashionably late. A child mutters something about soup in their sleep. You fold your blanket and quietly open the shutter. The world outside is dew-covered and hushed. Another day, another rotation, another night on the horizon. And you, well, you've travelled. You've wandered through straw beds and velvet ones, through vinegar compresses and opium-laced elixirs, through monk's bells and noble snores and dream hens and night soil collectors. You've felt the rhythm of segmented sleep beat gently beneath it all. And now, as you step into the day, you carry a little piece of it with you. Maybe tonight you'll wake at 2 a.m. and smile knowing you're not broken. You're just remembering. Now, soften your breath. Let the rhythm slow. Ease into the quiet. There's no rush. You're exactly where you need to be. Let the thoughts settle now. You've been everywhere tonight. Cobblestone alleys lit by candlelight. Quiet bedrooms buzzing with prayer and laughter. Dusty libraries full of dreams decoded like riddles. The noise of history has softened into a whisper, and you are still. Let your shoulders relax into the bed, your fingers uncurl. Let your eyes rest. Not because you must, but because they've seen enough for one night. Maybe your sleep tonight won't be perfect. Maybe you'll wake. Maybe your thoughts will stir. That's okay. You are part of a rhythm older than memory, older than clocks, than kings, than even language. A rhythm of first sleep and second sleep, and the sacred secret hours between. There's peace in that. So whatever time it is where you are, know that it's enough. There's nothing to prove. There's nothing to fix. You're here. The fire is low, the world is quiet, and your dreams, strange, silly, sacred, are waiting. Let them come. Sweet dreams.